Manufacturing animal feed takes raw agricultural ingredients such as corn, wheat, sorghum, forage, vitamins, additives, and minerals, and formulates them into a nutritious dietary need. And today, we are at the abattoir at Agege to see how these animal feeds are being produced.
Thank you very much. Generally, we cover the entire animal feed chain, including poultry, piggery, goatry, rabbitry, and whatever specification, including large animals, cattle and the rest of it. So those are the range. Those are the range. The longest of it, the one that consumes most of the time, is the fish feed, because from the point of mixing to pelleting and drying, it takes an average of 1 hour to do that. So, but for poultry, since you are not going to expose that to any form of heating, it's just straightforward mixing. You just take the measurements and then you mix. So in less than 10-15 minutes you can achieve poultry feed, but for fish, no, it takes longer time. Yeah, from the time spent on fish feed, you will realize that fish feed is more tasking. It takes longer time, and therefore it consumes more materials than the rest of it. But of course, in terms of costing, they are all, it's relative to what you want added to it, because the cost of the materials varies. And so if you want your formulation to be richer than, say, the formulation of Mr. X, the costing of the material will also differ. So costing is relative, really. But in terms of duration, time consumed, time spent, fish feed takes more time. Well, the ingredients used from start is what remains in it to finish. And you have quite a number of them. Like I said earlier, that feed formulation generally depends on if you have a formula that you are bringing to us to work with, or you want us to come up with a formula for you. Of course, you tell us what you are trying to achieve, but generally we have quite a number of ingredients that go into it, divided into the basic things like what are you trying to achieve in terms of your protein level, what level of energy do you want in the feed, what are the carbohydrate contents and all of that, Then the additives, including of course the essential amino acids, lysine, methionine and the rest of them. Now these things are all very expensive, particularly those that are sourced from outside of the country. You take into consideration the exchange rate and all of that, But most of the ingredients are sourced locally. So if you want me to itemize these things, well, let's start with the bulky ones. You have your maize, which some people call corn. You have your wheat offals. Now, wheat offals is a byproduct of the process of milling wheat, bread, flour, wheat, and all of that. That is supposed to be used for the process of formulating animal feed as well. Then, of course, you have your soya bean meal, which is the major protein ingredient that is in the feed, because that has to go through a lot of testing to ascertain the protein level. And if for any reason you find yourself using a soya bean meal that is not properly processed, that could wipe away the entire flock. So you need to be very, very careful in selecting soya bean meal for animal production, particularly for poultry, because that's a very sensitive area. For fish, for pigs, they are quite tolerant, but the poultry industry is not given to that tolerance level. So you need to be very careful. You know, so you have, as I said, maize, you have wheat offal, you have soya bean meal, you have groundnut cake. In the short form in the industry is called GNC. You know, groundnut cake is a major protein source as well. Then you have full fat soya. You also have fish meal. Fish meal. You have 72% fish meal, you have 68%, you have 65%. Now, from these percentages, you will know that one is more expensive than the other. You cannot cost 72% the same way you'll be costing 68 or 65. Then you have, of course, the industrial salt and so many other things. In the course of our moving around, you would have seen different brands of noodle wastes, you know, from various manufacturers of noodles, you know, for purposes of not being accused of advertising on behalf of the producers who would like to use the generic name noodles. You know, of course, you know there are various brands of noodles around. So noodle waste also go into feed manufacturing, and so many other things, lysine methionine, like I said, palm kernel cake, PKC, you know, and flour, waste flour as a binding agent for the fish feed production. Well, the ingredients, I should say, yes, some of them are imported, but most of them are locally sourced. The fish meal, the 72% I mentioned, is from Denmark, so that's imported. The lysine methionine are from various countries around the world. You have some from Israel, some from France, some from Germany, you know. So those are imported. And then things like the premixes. Of course, there are local ones, there are also imported ones. But the larger volume materials like maize, like wheat offals, like the noodles, like the soya bean meal and the rest of, all of those ones are locally sourced. So most of what go into feed production is locally sourced, but the very essential additives, I'm afraid we've not been able to perfect its production in Nigeria, so we still depend on import. Well, it depends on your stock, really. So if you have a farm, poultry farm for instance, we will want to ask you what number of birds you have and what age bracket are they in, because for poultry you have for the very little ones, which we call DOC, day-old chicks, you have chick mash, then you have grower mash, you have layer mash. Then if you are breeding for meat, you have the broiler starter and the broiler finisher. Now we will want to know your stock size before we can begin to look at, okay, this is the quantity they need to feed on to gain proper weight and then to be ready for the market. So that question is something that is assessed based on the information from the farmer. Presently, we are unable to even meet local demand, so the issue of export will not arise. And if you are very familiar with the policies of the federal government at the moment, they are keen more into agriculture and encouraging people to go into the agricultural sector, because we need to be self-sustaining as far as food is concerned in this country. So our focus for now is not in the export market. Our focus is to be able to meet our local demands, and we are working towards that. We are doing our very best. Then in terms of government policies, I think you will need to check the budget of the federal government yearly. I hope the issue of promoting agric is not something they are just using as a cliche, because if you look at the percentage of the budget, very little is allocated to the agricultural sector. So you then question the budget and say, if this is a major thrust of the government, why is it receiving this little attention? You know, so that is something that those in the policy angle of government needs to look into, because if we must be encouraged as feed manufacturers and farmers and people in the value chain of agriculture, we need to be encouraged with the kind of percentage we get in the budget for agriculture. So in terms of government incentive to agriculture, I think for those of us who are in it, we see it more on paper rather than in practical terms, because you can't easily access agric loan, for instance. They'll ask you for all manner of collaterals, which I don't think anybody in agric will be able to provide. You know, so they need to look at these things properly and then make it in such a way that it will be such that it will encourage young people to say, okay, we want to venture into it. Because by the time you are asking a young school leaver who wants to go into agriculture to bring house documents, you know, you provide this, provide that as collateral, where do you expect the person to get that from? So government is not doing so much. It's not doing so much. We need to be encouraged, and we need government to liberalize the policies so that we'll be able to grow this industry more. Yeah, for us, we are like what you call in the restaurant business a la carte. In the milling, in feed milling, what we do here, this is a cluster, and so we do what you call toll milling. Now, toll milling is we give you exactly what you can afford. So if you come and say, look, I have 50 birds at home, and I need to be able to feed them for the next 1 month, of course we'll do the costing for you based on the materials, and then we'll just charge you a percentage to be able to produce that feed for you. So I will say whatever we do here is cost effective and is pocket friendly, you know. But the commercial feed millers, I will not be able to speak for them, you know. To get their pricing, I will encourage you to also talk to them. But I know that their price most times is driven by the cost of materials. You understand? So it's not just about the availability of this and that. If you have maize, for instance, in the country, what about the amino acids that's been imported? At what cost is it landing? What about the premix that is going to be added? What about the vitamins that are going to go into the feed? At what cost are they landing? So cost is relative. And for us here, we'll tailor it to ensure that people do not go out of the agric value chain. So cost is not something that is cast in stone, because I may give you a price range now. By the time you're talking to me tomorrow, some things would have changed. So the variables are such that you cannot be fixated. You will need to work based on the current realities. Incidentally, if you are looking at immediate payout, you may not be encouraged, but it's something that grows over time. So in summary, yes, it is lucrative, but you need to be patient. You need to buy time on the job, because you need to cultivate people's confidence. They need to trust you. They need to use your formulations, and then when it gives them results, they will recommend you to other people. And as your clientele grows, your profit margin begins to widen as well. So, and it will also mean that the suppliers of the raw materials will trust you. So, for instance, you'll be able to get some credit facility. Somebody possibly bringing in maize from wherever will say, okay, I'm going to give you 60 tons of maize. I'll come back for my money in 2 weeks. If you have large clientele, in 2 weeks you would have run those out, and so you are trading on other people's money at that point. Okay, so it's lucrative. And then in terms of whether it's something young graduates can tap into, yes, It is something young graduates can tap into. Like you would have known, I have a background in mass communication, but here I am doing feed business. If it was not worth my while, I would not be here. So it is something I will encourage young people, but you also need to understudy those who are in it. It is not something you just get money from anywhere and then bam, you get into it. Where do you know? Do you know the farms? Do you know the farmers? Who are you going to supply? And this is not something that you see on the screen being advertised. So it is a personal thing. You need to do a lot of leg work to be able to achieve it. So for young graduates, yes, you may not start with poultry, you may not start with piggery. You can go to things like snailry, growing snails. That's a major area that a lot of people are not putting their minds to. You don't need so much money to go into snailry. And I make bold to tell you that people move snail from here to Ghana, Cote d'Ivoire, and all of those places. They make a lot of money, And you can just do that behind your house. Even if you are in a rented apartment, you can have understanding with your landlord and you just use a corner somewhere there and raise your snails. So that is one area that I will encourage young people to go into. And as the business grows, then you can then begin to look at milling feed for poultry, piggery, and the rest of it.